This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa, our top stories this morning. Further potshots. President Trump calls Jerome Powell either crooked or incompetent as the outcry over the DOJ's Fed probe continues. Trump says he'll announce his choice for Fed chair in the next few weeks. Trump urges Iranians to continue protests against the Khamenei regime, warning he will act accordingly once he knows how many demonstrators have been killed. Plus, as Uganda gears up for an election, we bring you our interview with the opposition leader, Bobi Wine. It's just gone 9 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Jumoke Oduwole in Dubai, as ever, keeping you up to date with what's been happening with markets and geopolitics, with Iran and President Trump taking to Truth Social, saying that, quote, help is on the way. So let's see what that help looks like. In the meantime, markets, this is where we're at. We saw a bit of a dip for Wall Street yesterday, focus on financials. JP Morgan disappointing expectations. So that stock was one of the laggards yesterday, down about 4%. And today you can see S&P futures just shy of 7,000, down about 0.2% as well. But earnings season continues. We will get more results out of the banks. JP Morgan missed on underwriting fees. Asia Pacific, the handover mostly positive, keeping a close eye on Japan, as we spoke about yesterday. Expectations building ahead of that snap election to come, potentially to come in February. So Winnie's going to walk us through that and the price action there. Two-year yields in the U.S. at 3.53. We had CPI data come in yesterday. Core CPI mildly coming in lower than expectations. So not seeing a lot of those inflationary pushes that we had towards the end of the year, which is perhaps welcome news for both the Trump and maybe the Fed as well. About 50 basis points priced in for cuts this year. And then silver, take a look at that. We are through $90 per ounce for the first time ever in history, up 4.5% today. So money just keeps going into those precious metals. And gold also very close to all-time highs. So gold, silver continue to benefit in the first couple of weeks of the year from geopolitical uncertainty and also questions about whether those Section 232 tariffs will actually go through for silver, might impact silver as well. Switching over our terminal chart for today, and this is just to highlight what I was telling you about those CPI figures and the fact that core and super core inflation are the lowest in years in the U.S. So things have actually been trending lower. And that little bump that we saw throughout the course of 2025 was somewhat of a tariff effect. But you could say at this point that most of that tariff effect has started to be unwound. So it's quite interesting that it was a lot less than some economists actually thought. The impact of tariffs is a lot less than some economists had thought on those CPI figures. So slightly weaker core CPI number coming through yesterday. Let's also check in on how markets in Asia are faring. Winnie Su is in our Hong Kong studio. Winnie.
Morning, Jomana. Another day, another record high for Asian stocks and also for Japanese stocks here. As you see, the Nikkei 225 here gaining more than 1%. Still on that Takaichi trade with the speculation around the snap election. And that is also showing cross-asset-wise with the Japanese yen now crossing that 159 level against the dollar. And when it comes to bond yields, we're seeing 5-year yield rising to that highest level since it debuted about 25 years ago. And that all goes to show how investors are still quite concerned when it comes to the political and fiscal risks around Takaichi's policies. Now, you flip the board and take a look at what's going on in China, because we've got that latest set of trade data. So exports and imports both are topping estimates. Specifically for exports, we're seeing up 6.6% in December year over year. And that is growing at its fastest pace in about 3 months. So combine these numbers together, we're talking about a trade surplus at $1.2 trillion in 2025, and that's another new record. So it goes to highlight that imbalance still existing between China's manufacturing capability and also that weak domestic demand. And for now, we're expecting that trend to continue, especially with the ongoing ceasefire with the U.S. Back to you, Jomana.
Yeah, well, a detente of sorts, but I don't think Trump's going to be too happy with that $1.2 trillion surplus for the year for China, the largest ever recorded in history. Winnie Su in Hong Kong, thank you so much. Well, let's broaden out the conversation. Joining us now is Christian Nolting, Global CIO for Deutsche Bank Private Bank. How are you feeling about 2026 this year?
Well, so far, we called, by the way, in our outlook, discipline beats drama. And I feel after some days already that had a lot. There's a lot of drama on the geopolitical side, always. But I feel especially at the beginning of this year, with Venezuela, now you see Iran, all of this happening. But the markets are doing okay.
Yeah.
So I think if you look at markets in a disciplined way, that's probably the right approach.
Why are markets doing okay?
But I think earnings are so far, we have to start seeing yesterday, but expected to be okay. And the macro backdrop is still a very positive one. We do see a lot of cuts of central banks potentially. We counted more than 80 globally. Maybe Japan, of course, is something different there. And then there's a lot of fiscal spending happening this year, right?
Yeah.
US, look at China, look at Europe. So from that perspective, that looks quite positive.
Do you believe that the conditions are still in place for growth to be positive, additive, and constructive this year? I
do think so, yeah. And of course, fiscal spending is helping on this. And then down the road, if you look at 27, 28, the question is that converted into productivity growth? And why not? So we need to see that. But at this point in time, I think markets look at this in a very positive way.
Doesn't it depend on which country is enacting fiscal spending and how, and also how much fiscal space they have? You look at example like France, and excess fiscal spending there is actually being punished by investors. Or in the case of the U.S., no punishment in sight. People seem to be rewarding the fact that there's more stimulus to come out of the big, beautiful tax bill. Yeah, I think that's what I meant by productivity growth, right? The question is always how much of this fiscal spending can be transformed into really growth, long-term growth. Yeah. And the US is probably better in this because of the structure of the economy than France or Germany as well, because productivity growth, the potential growth rate is much lower. Yeah, I saw in your report for the outlook for 2026 a really interesting chart showing that the bulk of capex spending and spending in artificial intelligence, this isn't going to come as a surprise to anybody, is happening in the United States, and in second place is China. When you see that, do your clients therefore think that the best opportunity still to get involved is in the U.S., or because valuations are so much higher now, are they thinking about spreading the investment opportunity in other parts of the world? Yeah, I think it's not so much the regional spreading. Of course, the U.S. is leading, and in the outlook, we really looked at the absolute number, not in relativity to GDP, because I think absolute number is very, very important. But it's not the regional thing from my point of view. The companies also in the U.S. are really global oftentimes, right? Yeah. For us, for this year, it's very important to look at the whole value chain. It's not only chip production, but it's also data centers and the next steps in the value chain of AI. I think that's the important thing if you look down the road, because if you only focus on chips, for example, then valuation at one point in time could be too high. But we think it's not a bubble at this point in time. There's a structural change, and that's why it's a positive boom. So how are you screening for opportunities in that space? Yeah, we look from AI, from the investments, where is it invested? You could clearly see it's been shifting. There's a lot of discussion about the data center. There's no discussion about cooling data centers. So it's electricity, it's power. So you look at the value chain, and then you see which companies could profit from there. And I wouldn't say then I just look at the US. I look at other regions as well. Yeah. Example again, you mentioned Europe. So even utility companies, electricity, are gaining in performance. And normally they are quite, say, boring. Yeah. But now they're interesting because of this. So there's a change, and that's the way we screen AI has made utilities interesting again, for sure, around the world. So much of the investment play in Europe has been around defense and infrastructure. That was the game in town last year. Yeah. Do you expect that to change this year? Not necessarily. I think there's even more to come. So again, looking at Germany, there's more spending to come on defense. Also depending on the situation in Ukraine, which would be, I think, a very important topic also in 26. Let's see if there's a solution that could be positive from a market perspective. So if you need to rebuild something, again, that's something which is on the agenda. But still, defense spending will not change from my point of view, also given the geopolitical backdrop we have this year. Yeah, and how are you thinking about cyclicals and cyclical performance in that environment with this sort of tepid European growth, but at the same time, at least in Germany, you have this drive for extra fiscal spending, directed fiscal spending?
True. I think what people want to see, really, there was quite an excitement for this fiscal spending. And last year, at this point in time, you saw that outperformance in Europe. Now, at the beginning of the year, still see that slight outperformance. Not sure it's the same trade as we saw last year. But what's important is I think investors really want to see Germany growing. So the growth is quite close to zero. But we do forecast for this year it could be 1.1 to 1.3%, which is quite a lot for Germany, powered by fiscal spending. But I think investors want to see it first. And then I think there could be also more investment into cyclical because they should profit from that growth.
Yeah. Great to have you on. Always good to chat to you. Christian Nolting, Global CIO for Deutsche Bank, a private bank. The Trump administration has eased the export rules for NVIDIA's H200 AI chips to China. The U.S. Commerce Department says it will now review applications case by case, although companies must follow requirements, including certifying no shortage of the chips in the U.S. Exporters must also limit shipments to China to 50% of U.S. production and follow strict customer checks. Coming up, Donald Trump is urging Iranians to keep protesting despite a government crackdown. We have all the latest next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumana Versace in Dubai. President Trump says he will announce his nomination to replace Fed Chair Powell within the next few weeks, despite the backlash over a Justice Department probe.
As you know, the inflation numbers just came out, and we have very low inflation, so that would give Too-Late Powell the chance to give us a nice, beautiful, big rate cut, which would be great. He's billions of dollars over budget, so he either is incompetent or he's crooked. I don't know what he is, but he certainly doesn't do a very good job.
Okay, let's get out to Rosalind Matheson, Bloomberg's chief Asia correspondent. So I guess attempting to brush away the backlash against the Department of Justice investigation into the Fed, Trump is now digging his heels in and saying that he is going to announce who his nomination for the Fed chair is going to be in the next few weeks. So what do we know about who is on the short list?
Well, that's right. As you heard from that clip, he's going to proceed with announcing his nomination. We know that, for example, NEC, Kevin Hassett has been considered at least a front runner. There are other names in the mix. They are still seemingly interviewing candidates for the Fed. But the reality is, while Donald Trump can nominate his preferred candidate for Fed chair, getting them through the process of confirmation might still become more difficult given the backlash over this probe into the Fed. You still have the Republican Senator Tom Tillis, who's the swing vote on the Senate Banking Committee, saying that he's not going to approve anybody until these legal matters are cleared up. And obviously, Donald Trump has now criticized him for that. But he's not the only one. A number of other GOP senators have criticized this investigation, as have, in fact, there have been comments of concern from some in the market, including Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan, who's saying it could have reverse consequences of, raising inflation expectations and therefore, rates go up, mortgage rates, impacts on business lending. So a lot of concern there about the possible impact. So the question is, does Donald Trump push ahead in nominating his candidate? But then what does the process of confirmation look like? And does that get very, very mucky indeed?
Ross, thank you so much. Certainly going to be a crucial couple of weeks for the direction of monetary policy. Rosalind Matheson, Bloomberg's chief Asia correspondent. Well, switching over to the region, U.S. President Donald Trump is urging Iranians to continue protests against the government of the supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Trump also suggested his next move would hinge on a meeting of the National Security Council, saying he will act accordingly after getting accurate numbers on the killing of protesters.
Iran says that it will retaliate in the instance of U.S. strikes against U.S. assets in the Middle East. What do you say to U.S. service members about why it is worth the risk to intervene in Iran?
Yeah, Iran said that the last time I blew them up with the nuclear capability, which they don't have any longer. So Iran said that the last time. They better behave.
Joining me now is Patrick Sykes, Bloomberg's breaking news editor in Istanbul. Trump also put up a post on Truth Social saying, quote, help is on the way. Do we have a better understanding of what that help might look like, Patrick?
I think everything really hinges on exactly what that help might look like right now. I mean, overnight, my colleagues reported about Elon Musk offering free Starlink subscriptions in Iran at the moment. That could be one form of help that the US could be providing, right through to the far end of the spectrum, obviously military as well. The other interesting part of his post, I thought, was this line about take over your institutions. And I think that's a recognition that we haven't seen kind of institutions collapsing in Iran in the face of these protests. We haven't seen yet defections of the kind that could really threaten regime cohesion. So he's urging Iranians to stay on the streets. With the internet blackout still in place, it's really hard to get a sense of whether that call has been heeded. But I think that's one thing we'll be watching in the coming days.
And do we have a better understanding of whether the Trump administration is considering going down the military route or the non-military route, to your point, perhaps helping on internet connectivity?
I think he's very deliberately leaving it ambiguous, right? He was asked quite directly, what does help mean? And he said something to the effect of, you'll have to figure that out for yourself. And I think that ambiguity, that uncertainty, that surprise factor that he brings to so many global issues is perhaps his strongest card in Tehran, where officials will be trying to calculate exactly that. And with that ambiguity in play, it makes it just that bit harder for them to try and second guess exactly what the US is thinking, second guess how they might be able to respond to it as well. For their part, obviously they have said we would respond, Iran would respond in the case of any strike. They've said they're not looking for war, but they are ready, indeed more ready than in the case of the June war just a few months back.
Patrick Sykes, Bloomberg's breaking news editor in Istanbul, thank you so much. Now, Greenland's prime minister has ruled out joining the U.S., saying the Arctic territory prefers to be in a union with Denmark. The prime minister says Greenland stands within the Kingdom of Denmark and is united in protecting fundamental values. A group of European countries are currently discussing plans for military presence in Greenland to show the U.S. that the continent is serious about Arctic security. President Trump dismissed the comments.
That's their problem. That's their problem. I disagree with him. I don't know who he is. Don't know anything about him, but that's going to be a big problem for him.
Coming up, Uganda's octogenarian president is seeking to extend his decades-long rule, facing a renewed challenge from a pop star turned politician, Bobi Wine. More on what's at stake next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumana Versace in Dubai. Uganda's main opposition leader is calling for a freeze on foreign funding for President Yoweri Museveni's administration. In an interview with Bloomberg's Jennifer Zabazaja, Bobi Wine, a pop star turned politician, told us international support is sustaining repression as the country approaches elections marked by security crackdowns and internet restrictions.
Foreign in the international community has always had a very, very big influence on the government of Uganda and on the runnings of the country. What disturbs us is the international community not using that influence for the benefit of the people of Uganda. And that is what we are calling them up to do, not to just deal with Jerome Powell as individual, but to deal with the nation, to deal with the people of Uganda as a nation, well knowing that the country will long outlive Museveni. The country has been here before Jerome Museveni, and the country will be here after Jerome Museveni. But most importantly, to call them out, to stop funding a renowned dictator, a gross human rights violator, the international community funding and consistently hobnobbing and cooperating with the Ugandan military dictator as if they are cooperating with a democratic leader. That is an abuse of the values they stand for, and it tantamounts to being partners in crime.
That was Bobi Wine, Uganda opposition leader and presidential candidate, speaking to our chief Africa correspondent, Jennifer Zabazaja, who joins us from London. Jen, walk us through what is at stake in Uganda's presidential election and what are the odds of Bobi Wine actually being successful in his run for the presidency?
Right, Jumana, good morning to you. I think from many people watching, there is a very little chance that we will see Bobi Wine or Robert Kyagulanyi actually winning this election. And as he would put it himself and what he said to us, they believe that there is tampering within this election in and of itself. And he calls President Museveni, General Museveni, because of the way in which he feels that he is at least leading or governing over the country. We should mention, of course, as you did there, the president has been in power for more than 4 decades, one of the longest serving leaders across Africa. And so despite him and the president being credited with a bit of stability within the Ugandan economy, also has been a key regional actor as far as security goes. Of course, we know Uganda is very close to the Democratic Republic and Rwanda. And also, as he was just mentioning there, has been host to many priorities for the West in terms of refugees. Uganda has and hosts one of the biggest refugee populations on the continent. And so there is a lot of focus on this election just because of the fact that, you know, we are seeing President Museveni obviously getting older, serving out his term to the longest that we've seen many African countries. And so many people are wondering, what does this mean for the country moving forward? He has been slipping in terms of his margin of victory and his popularity in the country. And also there's been growing opposition to some of the crackdowns, the alleged crackdowns that we've been seeing in the country. There also is no clear successor. And so as we continue to see Uganda being at least a priority for the IMF and for other players outside of the region, there's oil production set to begin in the country later this year. Many people are wondering really what the future of this country looks like. And many onlookers are using this election, or at least taking this election as potentially one of the windows into what that could look like. And so Bobi Wine has said they are going out not just with his picture, but actually with the picture of the Ugandan flag, because their focus is on the future prosperity of the country.
Jen, thank you so much. Jennifer Zabazaj, our chief Africa correspondent, and great interview with Bobi Wine. Quick look at equity futures. Things are trading sideways, but of course, keeping a close eye on geopolitics. We will be speaking to Mehran Kamrava to talk about the latest in Iran. Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. Further potshots. President Trump calls Jerome Powell either crooked or incompetent as the outcry over the DOJ's Fed probe continues. Trump says he'll announce his choice for Fed chair in the next few weeks. Trump urges Iranians to continue protests against the Khamenei regime, warning he will act accordingly once he knows how many demonstrators have been killed. Plus, we speak to the Nigerian Trade and Investment Minister as the country continues its focus on attracting foreign investment. Catch that interview live later this hour. It's just gone 9:30 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Jumana Versace in Dubai. Well, for markets, we saw a bit of a dip for Wall Street yesterday. Focus on the earnings season, which has begun. Financials with JP Morgan leading the pack in terms of reporting yesterday, slightly underperforming expectations on investment banking underwriting. So on the back of that, we did see some weakness in the financial space. JP Morgan down about 4%. So that pulled down the overall index. Today, S&P futures leaning sideways, moderately negative, down about 0.2%, just shy of 7,000. But the handover from Asia Pacific, mostly positive, up 0.5%, keeping a close eye on two things this morning. China, very strong export numbers for December and for the full year last year, in addition to all the positivity around Japan and the potential upcoming snap elections. Winnie will walk you through that in just a moment. Treasury yields in the U.S. sitting at 3.52. We have about 50 basis points of cuts priced in. I'll show you that chart in just a moment. And then silver breaking through $90 to the upside for the first time ever in history. We are up 4.2% today. Money keeps pouring in to those safe havens, to the precious metals. Gold and silver continue to benefit from this geopolitical uncertainty in the world. And at the same time, also potential tariffs in the space too. So don't forget about those Section 232 tariffs. Switching over, this is the chart I wanted to talk to you about, which is essentially what is priced in for the rate curve this year in the U.S. It's a little over 50 basis points, 52 basis points. So we have basically 2 cuts priced in. A couple of things to think about. Yesterday, we had the CPI numbers come through in the U.S. The core CPI disappointed, or came in, not disappointed, actually, came in slightly softer than market expectations. So soft inflation print there. And the second thing to think about, obviously, is who Trump nominates to succeed the Fed Chair Jerome Powell. He said that he will make up his mind in the next couple of weeks. So both of those influencing the path from here. Okay, let's also check in on how markets in Asia are faring. Winnie Su is in our Hong Kong studio. Winnie.
Yes, Jomana, a bit of a development here in Asia today as we see Asia Pacific paring back a bit of its gains just earlier, mainly led by the CSI, the onshore CSI 300, and that is coming after China says that it's raising a margin financing ratio to 100% from earlier 80% for stock exchange, including Shanghai, Beijing, and also Shenzhen, and that is part of the government's effort to curb risks and also to cool the market down a little bit. So we see gains really tracking lower a little bit for the onshore market. And when it comes to Japanese stocks, again, rising up more than 1% for the Nikkei 225, still on that Takaichi trade. And we're seeing a 5-year yield also rising earlier, touching that that highest level since 2000, still around these concerns when it comes to the fiscal risk around Takaichi. Now, flip the board and quickly look at what's going on in the currency space, because something really interesting that we have been observing is that when we're talking about all these stocks rising to record highs in Asia, in fact, currencies, when it comes to Japanese yen around 159 against the dollar, the won is also losing and weakening for a 10th session right now. Back to you, Jumana.
Winnie Su in Hong Kong, thank you so much. Well, U.S. President Donald Trump is warning Iranian leaders to show what he described as some humanity towards protesters. That's as his team considers the administration's next move. Trump earlier called on Iranians to keep up their protests against the government, promising that help was on its way.
Yeah, the message is they've got to show humanity. They've got a big problem, and I hope they're not going to be killing people. And I'm going to have a report very soon. Ideally, you'd like to see it, but what we want to see is we don't want to see people killed. And we want to see a little bit of freedom for these people.
Joining us now is Mehran Kamrava, professor of government at Georgetown University in Qatar. A lot to discuss with you. Let me just pick up with President Trump's comments there, his post on Truth Social saying, quote, help is on the way. What type of help would actually benefit the protesters on the ground?
The kind of help that would help protesters on the ground is for the U.S. to do nothing, because if the Americans were to attack any kind of a target in Iran, that would further justify the government's clampdown on the protests. It would validate their claim that the protesters are supported by the United States and by Israel. And so I think the best thing that the United States can do is really to sit aside and let events take their course, which is against Donald Trump's nature, unfortunately.
Okay, so if you think it's better for the U.S. to sit back and do nothing to see how this all is going to play out, how much of an existential threat do you think these demonstrations actually are to the Iranian regime? Do you see this as the beginning of the end then?
That's a good question, and I don't think anyone knows the answer to that quite. At some point, demonstrations take on a life of their own, and they become uncontainable. Have we reached that point yet or not is difficult to tell. So far, there are no indications that the security forces are either declaring their political neutrality or that there is any kind of tensions within the ruling elite. Everyone in Iran, in the Iranian government, appears to be speaking with the same voice, wanting to contain the protests. And unless and until there's some sort of an indication that the security forces are either defecting the government or not willing to shoot on the demonstrators, then I wouldn't say we've seen the end of the Islamic Republic. I think it's important to remember that we've written the obituary of the Islamic Republic many times in the past. Is this the beginning of the end? Is this time different? I think that's hard to tell at this point, at least.
Is there any sense at all, and I hear what you're saying now about the central command still being in place from the regime's perspective, but are there any signs at all that perhaps the security forces may be growing tired of the clerics, of having the religious supreme leader dictate the country's direction? I mean, is there a possibility that there could be a replacement with, say, a reform-minded military individual? So somewhat of a continuity, but a replacement at the top.
Right. Again, that's another excellent question, and it's a point that has actually been openly discussed in Iran. We don't know quite how the Revolutionary Guards operate or what their internal thinking is. In many ways, at least to those of us who are not in the intelligence community, the Revolutionary Guards remain a black box. And if they make a move, let's say, hypothetically, if they were to place Supreme Leader Khamenei under arrest and install an interim caretaker government, that is something that many people have foreseen in the past, but it has never happened. And at least on the surface, publicly, there are no indications that that might happen for the time being, but it is something that is often discussed in relation to Iran.
Okay. I want to come back to the conversation we had at the beginning, which is the potential for U.S. action. And let's say they actually do go down the military route at this point, because it's not out of the question. They did something similar last summer. Yesterday, a spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Qatar warned that if the U.S. do get involved, it would be catastrophic for the region. Do you agree that there could be broader spillover effects to the region, to the U.S. assets in other parts of the Gulf, if they were to go down the route of military intervention?
I do. In fact, I live in Qatar myself, and for the first time, I am genuinely concerned. And the reason is that the so-called axis of resistance doesn't exist anymore. And military leaders and commanders in Iran are quite aware of that. So instead of resorting to the axis of resistance and proxy groups to harm American interests here and there, they're likely to resort instead to their missile program. And they were not going to hit the American heartland, but hit American targets in their own vicinity and in the region, in the Middle East or in the Persian Gulf region. And so that is an ominous development. And I think that's why we saw the very pointed remarks by the Qatari Foreign Ministry. This does not bode well for regional stability.
Okay, Mehran Kamrava, really good to have you on. Very sensitive time, obviously, in the region and for Iran right now. Professor of Government at Georgetown University in Qatar. Thank you. Well, coming up, Nigeria strikes a new economic pact with the UAE as the country looks to attract more foreign investors to boost growth. We'll speak to the country's industry, trade and investment minister next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumoke Oduwole in Dubai. Nigeria has signed a new economic partnership agreement with the UAE aimed at deepening trade ties and unlocking fresh investment across key sectors, including renewable energy, aviation, and digital trade. President Bola Tinubu says technology, including AI, is now central to the country's growth strategy as it looks to attract foreign investors.
The adoption of artificial intelligence, AI, to optimize efficiency is no longer a matter of the future. We are actively seeking partnership that promote technology transfer, knowledge exchange, and innovation.
Joining us now is Jumoke Oduwole, Nigerian Industry, Trade and Investment Minister, and Jennifer Zabazaja, our Chief Africa Correspondent, who joins us as well. Minister, really good to have you with us. Congratulations on the trade agreement that has been signed with the UAE. Talk to us about how much value you expect it to unlock and what that could actually mean in terms of trade between Nigeria and the UAE.
Thank you for having me on. So congratulations to everyone. Both countries can expect a significant amount of increased trade and investment. For Nigeria, exports to the UAE, over 7,000 lines, from pharmaceuticals to food, agricultural products, where Nigerians are competitive, hospitality. Business owners can also open subsidiaries and offices in the UAE. Business owners can be here up to 90 days in a year. So a lot of activity aspects that can come in. For the UAE side, investors have been wanting to come in renewable energy, in construction and infrastructure. And so having this umbrella, as the companies like to call it, is what enables investors to come in with confidence. Also, Nigeria has opened over 6,000 lines, some immediate and some over the next 3 to 5 years.
Minister Oduwole, this is Jennifer in London. So when we spoke back in September, you talked about some of the efforts of the Tinubu administration to diversify the economy and also its trade partners. How does this get you to some of those ambitions that you set out for?
So the Middle East, particularly the UAE, is one of the relationships that President Tinubu has been cultivating since he came into office. This will be about his 4th visit to the country. The presidents get along well, and we've been working so hard over the last 11 months. I was at Investopia right here in Abu Dhabi in March, earlier last year. And so we started this discussion mainly to facilitate investments in key areas into the economy. He's repeatedly stated that Nigeria is open for business. We've been cultivating new friends like here. We've also been in Brazil. We've been in China. We've also made sure that our strategic long-term partners like the US and the UK have been at the table as well.
You mentioned Brazil as well back in September. Talk about some of those other trading partners and how this agreement compares to some of the discussions that you're having with the likes of Brazil and the US and the UK.
So our response to trading on our agenda under the Renewed Hope agenda of this administration remains stable, remains focused. We are focusing on non-oil diversification of exports in the economy, which is why this agreement is particularly important, because it encourages Nigerian exporters to come through this very important trade hub in the global scene. It also makes sure that UAE investors who want to come into Africa can have Nigeria as a landing spot, as a landing place to invest in productivity, in manufacturing, in services to spread across the continent. So it's really a win-win for everyone.
You know, it's good to hear you talk about all of these trade agreements that you've been signed. And obviously, one of the topics that we've been speaking about a lot on the show in the past years, all the reforms that Nigeria has conducted in the last couple of years. But at the same time, if you look at the FDI flow, it's still as a percentage of GDP sub 0.5%. We don't have the figures yet, obviously, for 2025. Should there be more reforms that have to be enacted in order to encourage more FDI into the country?
Well, as we all know, there's always a bit of a lag for capital. This is something we've been tracking and chasing very carefully. You see our portfolio investment has gone like off the charts. Nigeria was like the 5th best stock exchange in the world. And FDI takes time. It's patient capital. You have to cultivate it. You asked me about Brazil, cultivating those investments, cultivating investments from the Gulf region, from UAE in particular. We've already had some early movers. First Abu Dhabi Bank has been active, is coming right into Nigeria, has had the sort of first mover advantage in investing in our Lagos-Calabar Coastal Highway. That's a big infrastructure project. It's a syndicated arrangement. And so you see that investors have been taking a closer look and have been having the confidence to come in on the back of the reforms that have been implemented by the Tinubu administration.
And Minister, you've also focused really on protecting the domestic economy. Are you looking at other measures in terms of continuing to protect some of the industries within Nigeria and also your export capacity?
Yeah, so it's a basket of tools. We've focused on diversification of non-oil exports, and so we've been looking at working on market access. We've prioritized the African Continental Free Trade Area. We've looked at where Nigeria is competitive. We're quite competitive in services, so we've given that quite a bit of attention. You've seen our efforts on digital trade, the focus there. We've also not neglected areas where, in terms of industrialization, we also have that where we need the productivity. The importation, if you look at the list, will be attracting imports that will support the productivity in the domestic market. We've also been revamping our special economic zones, the reforms around there, which speaks to the architecture, the tax architecture, and other reforms that we've newly implemented as an administration. So we know it's going to take some time. It's a whole basket of tools that we've been using as a team, the entire government, but we've been seeing the results coming incrementally.
Jumoke Oduwole, Nigeria's Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, and Jennifer Zabazaj, our Chief Africa Correspondent. Thank you so much for joining us. And once again, congratulations on the SIPA. Now, coming up, Wall Street is under pressure. We discuss how banks are responding to Trump's attack on highly profitable credit card fees. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumana Bersachi in Dubai. Wall Street is scrambling after President Trump's attack on two of the biggest ways lenders make money from credit cards, as well as demanding a 10% cap on interest rates for a year. Trump took aim at swipe fees that retailers are charged. JP Morgan CFO called the rate cap bad for consumers and very bad for the economy. For more, Bloomberg's Charlie Wells joins us from London. Well, Charlie, it is earnings season. Typically, we talk about all of the earnings that have come through, but one of the big themes this year has been Trump announcements vis-a-vis capping those credit card charges. How much of an impact is that going to have on JP Morgan's business? Did we learn anything yesterday?
Joanna, this could have a significant impact on JP Morgan's credit card business. And those are words from Jeremy Barnum, the CFO of JP Morgan, who answered questions yesterday. These are sort of the last questions I think anyone just a few weeks ago thought that banking executives would be taking this earnings week. But he said that this could have a significant impact on the credit card businesses at JP Morgan because they have a large business. So at the end of last year, credit card loans at JP Morgan stood at $250 billion. They brought in $7 billion in revenue in the fourth quarter. And so, to put it in his words, everything is on the table as far as fighting this cap. Now, we know that banks have significant lobbying power. They can go against this. But Bloomberg has also been reporting on the ways that banking executives across the industry have been thinking about how they could deal with some of these measures coming from the White House. They could do things like have, say, 10% temporary offers on credit card interest rates. They're kind of behind the scenes trying to figure out how to navigate this at the same time as presenting a public image that is a little bit more calm. But we did certainly hear fighting words yesterday on credit cards from JP Morgan.
Yeah, well, another big day coming up. We've got Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citi, all reporting later today. No doubt credit cards are going to feature too. What else are we watching out for?
Well, look, so yesterday there was a surprise miss in investment banking from JP Morgan, and I think this gets at one of the big questions that analysts had going into this week, which was, are the deals that we've been talking about, that we have been seeing go through, are they going to carry these banks? Are they going to bring those fees that we saw? And a lot of this, as we were discussing earlier, has to do with some of the calendar issues, right? So some of these deals just did not close on the timeline that JP Morgan may have been expecting. Let's see if that carries out at the other banks. Also, JP Morgan did have really strong trading revenue. Does that carry through at the other banks in a time when there's been a lot of volatility, a lot of uncertainty? Net interest income, that's also going to be in focus because because in this environment that at least until this week has seemed very much in favor of the banking industry, banks have been growing their loan books, and that tends to be good for net interest income. And I think, as you were suggesting earlier, one of the key questions is, how do executives take questions on some of these policies coming out of the White House? How combative are they? How do they sort of thread the needle on talking about how they will navigate this affordability push that we're hearing from the White House as they seem to take on Wall Street in a very new tone?
Yeah, that is precisely it. Taking on Wall Street in a very new tone, and not a tone that Wall Street is used to. Bloomberg's Charlie Wells, thank you so much for breaking it down for us. Looking forward to the recap tomorrow as we look back at today's bank earnings. So that's on the agenda. Obviously, more earnings to watch out for. But this is your read across markets. We've got S&P futures tilting towards the red, down 0.2%. Similar for the Nasdaq. Dow also down about 0.3. European markets not doing a whole lot, but of course contending with a whole multitude of different issues going on in the world. Geopolitics over here in the region, keeping a close eye on what is happening in Iran, with the real possibility that the U.S. get involved somehow. Whether it's kinetic or non-kinetic is a big question that we're going to be getting some answers to, hopefully, in the next couple of days. But that is it for Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumana Bersachi in Dubai. Stay with us for Daybreak Europe. This is Bloomberg.